Well, welcome to a three-session program on the edTPA. Each session will be approximately an hour in length. Probably the second session will be 2 hours in length. And the purpose of this is not to totally immerse you in the edTPA process, but at the same time give you a very good sense of what edTPA is all about and what your responsibilities are in order to receive New York State certification. The next session will be in December, or the next two sessions, as a matter of fact, will be in December, and the dates will be announced. I know that one will be in the first week of December, and I believe the third one is on December 11th, but don't quote me on that. We will announce those dates to you. My name is Anthony Napoli, and I serve as the Director of the Alternative Teaching Certification Program, and also as the edTPA Coordinator for St. John's University. At any time, with any question, simply send your question to Napoli, N like in Nancy, A-P-O-L-I-A like in Anthony, at stjohns.edu. If you have any questions on student teaching, you should contact Professor Burke, B-U-R-K-E-L-1 at stjohns.edu. And since Professor Burke at this time is out on sick leave, contact Professor Pedota, P-E-D-O-T-A-P at stjohns.edu. At the same time, if you feel comfortable, you can make an appointment with me at any time to come up and to speak to me about particular concerns that you may have in preparing for the edTPA process. The second session, as I said, will be announced in a short period of time, and I look forward to meeting any of you who have particular questions. Now, you should have in front of you some paper and pencil. You should have in front of you and download what is called Task 1, but I prefer to call it Session 1 so that we don't get this confused with Task 1 of the edTPA process. So download what you are seeing as Task 1, and the top paper says Test for Teacher Certification. This is the material that will give you a great deal of insight into the program, and I'm going to comment on each of these pieces. You must first pass three tests: the Academic Literacy Skills Test, known as the ALST, Educating All Students Test, commonly called the EAS test, and the Content Specialty Test, the CST. It's possible that some people, especially the fellows, have already passed the CST, so they don't have to pass the new CST. I'm basically making my presentation to those who are going to be student teachers starting in spring 2014 and thereafter. But this will be helpful for anybody who has to go through the edTPA process. I just may add that presently English in the cohort 23 do not have to go through this process, and cohort 24 students do not have to go through this process at this time. Let's look at the test. The first test consists of selected responses dealing with literacy issues. The second test is deals with scenario-based responses as to teaching, and of course the last test deals with a test of content in your subject area. We will be preparing, you have been prepared through your courses, student teachers, to pass these tests and to have the information. We are looking at, or I've requested that a review program be held in the spring in preparation for these tests. All the tests are explained on this first page called Test for Teacher Certification. In order to register for the test, I've included a second page which gives you the website to register for the exams. You must understand that some exams are given online, but not all of the exams are given online. So the site and the dates and the times and locations for the exams will be provided once you register online. If you want to try, and I say this with a grin, try to register by phone, I'm going to give you the phone number. I must say that individuals who have tried have become frustrated with the fact that they have been put on hold for such a long period of time. But here's the phone number if you want to try. 1-413-256-2882. And you can call between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. I would suggest that you register as soon as possible because you have to remember that everybody in the state who's in a similar type of program is going to register for the exams to be held in the spring. And that's when you must take the exams in order to prepare for your ability to teach in September. And you must also pass the edTPA to teach in September. Those of you who are applying for initial certification must also pass the bullying and discrimination training program, which is a 6-hour program, which will be held here at St. John's University. However, at this particular point, I do not have the dates or the times and the locations of these exams. I'm waiting for the university to get back to me, and then we will put it on the website for you to know. Now, the first few pages deal with the edTPA glossary, which is very, very important. The academic language, both oral and written language, to be used for academic purposes. I'm making an assumption that as you've gone through your coursework, you have become familiar with the glossary of terms and the academic language used for the edTPA. This particular language changes somewhat with the specific content, but basically the pages that I've provided for you, and they are 3 pages of information, help you in regards to reviewing the academic language, so that if you come across a word such as discourse, which is the second word on this page, okay, you know exactly what they are looking for. Basically, they're looking for structuring of oral and written language that is useful for mechanics and communication. And this is going to be highly dealt with in the English Language Arts program. And the English Language Arts program, of course, deals with the various forms of language to be used in various types of oral and written presentations. So, for example, there's certain language to be used in the writing of a persuasive essay and that sort of thing. Try to, in your best, become familiar with all of these terms. So if you come across any of these terms in the assessments that you're going to take, you'll be able to understand what these terms are referring to. I just want to go down and highlight a couple of these terms. If you stay on page 1 for a moment and go down to the second to the last term called artifacts. Artifacts are authentic works completed by you and your students, including lesson plans, copy of instructional and assessment materials, video clips of your teaching, and student work samples. Artifacts are submitted as part of your evidence when you submit your edTPA material. It's very, very important that you collect student material, and that on that student material that you provide some feedback. Feedback is a very important element that has to go along with the artifacts. I always suggest, and this is simply my suggestion, that for each of the activities that you use, that there be some sort of rubric that the students can make reference to. And that rubric becomes the basis for feedback. So when I had the luxury of teaching, I made the students very familiar with rubrics, say, in writing. And then after about a month of giving feedback, I would then enter a grade based on that feedback. The following month, say November or December, I would simply give the feedback. And then say to the students, based on the feedback, what grade do you think you should have? If a student says A and you really thinks a D, then that's an opportunity to provide more instructional input to that student, an explanation of why the student is not utilizing the feedback correctly. Otherwise, the feedback, in my experiences, are simply put aside by the students. And I know that many of you will spend a great deal of time on correcting writing and oral presentations, etc. Even in my oral presentations, by the way, which were part of the lesson plans, I would provide a rubric for oral presentations because I would use that as a point of assessment. But I'll get to assessment in a moment, and even more depth on the third session that we have. Jot down any questions that you may have, and at some point you may want to email that to me. Let me go back down to the last term on this page, and that is the word assessment. There are 4 tasks associated with edTPA, and I'm going to go through all 4 tasks over the next 3 sessions. The third task is assessment, and from my perspective, I think that's going to be the most difficult part of the edTPA process. But I'm sure you took a course in assessment or are taking a course in assessment, have become familiar with various forms of assessment. But assessments can be both informal and formal. Again, in my experiences, and I've seen teachers now start to move away from this format, in my experiences in my schooling, and even when I first started to teach, assessment was simply limited to exams. So every other Friday, teachers would give an exam, and that's how they would assess students. We are now speaking about assessment differently, that during the course of a lesson, you are going to be assessing informally to ensure that the students are successfully completing the task that you have set forth. Remember that lesson plans should be a student-centered lesson plans. We must move away from what I'm doing right now, which is basically boring, a didactic approach to teaching. I wish if I had you in class, I would have it to be very student-centered, where you'll be working on various aspects of the edTPA. But I don't have the luxury of being with you live, and this is the best that I can do at this time. That's why I invited you to come to see me anytime you have specific questions. So as you're going through your lesson and you have the students conducting a task, let me give you an example. If the task happens to be you wanted the students to read a paragraph, let's say the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, which by the way is only 1 sentence long. But then you say to students, I want you in your own words to translate that paragraph. I want you in your own words to describe what that paragraph is about. And now they are engaged in writing. At this particular point, as you are monitoring, you are noticing that 80% or 60% or 40% of your class is not able to make that translation. That's informal assessment. You shouldn't move on if you are utilizing the Declaration of Independence. And I selected that document because it starts in the elementary school, it goes up right through the high school. You shouldn't move on if that is what you're trying to achieve in regards to literacy. Now, I selected a very difficult document, especially for elementary schools. But elementary schools in grades 4 and 5 in New York State, the Declaration of Independence is covered. That's the reason why, but that is probably the most difficult document you would have in American history. It could be other type of materials. Keep in mind that under the edTPA and under Common Core, you have to be using not 100% non-fiction material and primary sources. That's going to be another challenge for you. So, after you do an informal assessment, you probably would want to modify how you want the students to learn and to be able to translate the first paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. In doing this, you have to have somewhat knowledge of what the students have been able to do before. What skills do they possess as they come into your classroom situation? And this is extremely important for you to do. And what learning should take place for the students to be able to achieve that task. You're going to be facing classrooms with a diversity of students. You will have in your classroom students who are challenged, special ed students. You'll have in your classroom students who are English language learners. You'll have in your classroom students who have no idea of the Declaration of Independence because they migrated from other countries and are not familiar with our history. So you have to keep all of that in mind. Teaching is not an easy task. It's a very, very complex task that has to be approached. If you go to page 3 of the glossary and come down to the 4th area, learning segments. This is very, very important. When you submit your material to the state, you're not going to submit a lesson plan. You are going to submit a learning segment. You can call it a unit consisting of 3 to 5 lessons, all of which have a central focus with a clearly defined beginning and a clearly defined end, clearly defined objectives, clearly defined informal assessments, clearly defined formal assessments taking place. And in that lesson plan, and I'll get into this in a moment more in depth, you're going to have to demonstrate in written form how you're going to account for the different types of learning that must take place in your classroom based upon what I just mentioned, whether they are special ed students, students who are English language learners, students who come to you who are born here in the United States but who are very deficient in literacy skills. That is the task of the teacher. Keep in mind, the parents do not keep their good students at home and only send the bad academic students to school. They send their students to school, and teaching is very, very challenging, has always been very, very challenging. But the university here and your coursework and the little that we're doing here to make you aware of edTPA is not to increase your anxiety, but to say to you that these are the elements to ensure that your students are going to academically achieve. There's a major shift taking place in education, and that shift is found in both the Common Core and also in regards to the edTPA process. With that, let me move on to my next area, which is, it's called Task 1. That's why I don't want you to mix this up with all the documents of Session 1. Today I want to spend time on the planning commentary on Task 1. This you should be very well prepared to capture. And you have in front of you 3 pages representing all of Task 1. I want you to go to the 3rd page. And on the 3rd page, it clearly spells out that lesson plans should include the following information. Number 1, I'm sorry I have to read this to you, but I want to emphasize this to you. State-adopted student academic content standards or the Common Core state standards that are the target of student learning. Common Core standards, this has to be stated under your objectives. Please list the number and text of the standard. If only a portion of the standard is being addressed, then only list the relevant parts. Now, in the materials that you're going to be receiving in the next session are the Common Core standards for reading and math. Those of you teaching social studies, those standards will come out eventually. They're being reviewed right now. But I recommend that social studies, along with the English teachers, deal with the issues of literacy, both reading and writing literacy in their classes. I don't know how a social studies teacher cannot deal with this. As a matter of fact, I advocate, and this is my opinion, that all subject matters deal with the issue of reading and writing in their classes. That has to be part of a lesson plan. And remember, a lesson segment is 3 to 5 lesson plans. Secondly, the objectives associated with those content standards. In other words, what do you want the students to be able to achieve? And then, of course, you have to build in the assessments in that particular lesson, which is part of the lesson segment, okay, and related to the Common Core standards. Now, in my position, I review all the observations being done by the mentors from St. John's University. I read them all. I often notice that although Common Core standards are clearly stated, when I see a description of the activities taking place, it is not always clear that the Common Core standards are being dealt with from the activities. That's very, very important, and that has to be cleared in your lesson plan. And by the way, if you have what you think is a good lesson plan, if you email that to me, I can review that and get that back to you. Now, just a caution, please. I get many, many emails every day, so you can't expect feedback within the next half hour, but I do check my email and deal with my emails. I'm not here on Fridays, but I do it on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday mornings, and I will get back to you in a relatively short period of time. The reason why I have to do that is because whenever you give a homework assignment or you give the students an assignment, you can't wait 3 weeks to give that student back the assignment. Otherwise, it's not going to have any value. That has to come back to them almost immediately, especially if you're providing feedback. And simply putting a check on top of a paper is not feedback. Or simply putting a grade of A or a grade of D on a paper is not feedback. So therefore, you have to be very, very careful that you do not overload yourself with paperwork, that you are cognizant of why you're giving a homework assignment. You understand why you are giving a long-range assignment. Not all this has to be written. You're going to give assessments based upon oral presentations. You're going to give assessments based upon debates that may take place in the classroom. At the lowest level, you may give an assessment based upon filling in a Venn diagram or another form of a diagram, etc. And also the lesson plan. Go down to number 3 now. I hope everybody is with me. You don't have to worry if you have to leave the room for a bit, by the way, because this will always be available to you. But if you go down to number 3, formal and informal assessments used to monitor student learning, including the types of assessment and what is being assessed, have to be in the lesson plan. And I'm sure that through your courses you have learned how to do this. But look, we always need enrichment and remediation, etc. So myself, and Professor Burke, and Professor Pedoto are available to provide that help to you. You must also include the instructional strategies and the learning task, including what you are doing and what the students will be doing that support diverse student needs. That reminds me of something. I want to go back to objectives. As the teacher, if I say I will be covering the causes of the Civil War, that is not an objective. It has to be in the terms of student achievement. So that objective would be students will be able, in writing, to describe the causes of the Civil War. Now notice I built in a form of assessment. Okay? So that would be a form of assessment And I have to judge whether or not they're able to do this. All right? I can elaborate on that, but that is extremely important. And lastly, instructional resources and material used to engage students in learning. This is extremely important, especially in light that the Common Core requires the use, to a large percentage of the time, of nonfiction material or primary sources. Obviously, the Declaration of Independence is a primary source. This is true in both English and in social studies, the use of nonfiction material. In my work with schools and districts throughout the country, that is a problem in the inability to get access to these materials. However, more and more publishers are coming out with these materials. Just be careful. Your lesson should be driven not by a textbook necessarily, but your lesson should be driven by what you want the students to be able to achieve based upon a realistic diagnosis of where your students are at this moment. All right, now let's go back to page 1. Page 1 is the planning commentary. And we're speaking here solely about what is called Task 1, which is different from Session 1, where you have all this material. Session 2, you're going to get a thick stack of material. You must first of all write a 9-page, single-spaced response to all of the prompts stated in Task 1. And you must not use a font larger than 11. As a matter of fact, let me put it in a different way, positive way. You must use font 11. And in the planning commentary, along with this commentary which you're going to write, and by the way, you cannot be helped in writing this, but along with the commentary that you're going to write, you must attach your lesson segment, because you're going to make reference to the lesson segment through Task 1. If you choose Task 2, which is the videotaping, you can use the same lesson, and if we've got in Task 3. By the way, assessment is difficult because assessment runs throughout all of the tasks. So, the first part is the central focus. And there are 3 parts, A, B, and C. And A, describe the central focus and purpose for the content you will teach in this learning segment. Notice they're using the term learning segment. That's why it's very important to become familiar with the glossary of terms that we started off with today. I was about to say this morning, but you may be watching in the afternoon, or you may be watching it at night. But I'm doing this in the morning hours, so I apologize. Okay. The central focus and purpose for the content you will teach in the learning segment. What will that be? The content. Now, in some cases, the content may be how to deal with the issue of inferences in reading. That's legitimate content. That has to be part of the whole learning segment. Or the content can be what we commonly know as content. A discussion of the poetry of Phyllis Wheatley, or Washington Irving, or a discussion of the poetry of the poetry coming out of the colonial period, or the causes of the American Revolutionary War, or whatever it may be. That is established by the state. So you would write down that prompt, and then you would answer that prompt in writing as part of your 9-page single-spaced commentary. Now, on the next segment, I'm going to give you, we didn't send all the segments at once. The next segment, I'm going to give you examples of a prompt that have been approved by the state. But the language has to be your language. You have to use the academic language that we briefly went over, so become familiar with that. I'm not going to go through all this, but let me go to B for a moment. Given the central focus, describe how the standards and learning objectives within your learning assessment address an essential literacy strategy. Literacy is always there. That's the Common Core. Requisite skills. What skills are necessary? And the reading and writing connections. I would also add the oral connections. I'm very much into the need for, I used to use the Cornell University note-taking model so that the students were engaged for 100% of the allocated time. And that, by the way, was used as part of their assessment, so that the students had the opportunity to write constantly, to speak to each other. I'll speak more on strategies, but just while I'm thinking about in discourse, when you're saying about having the students engage in discourse, make sure you know the elements of discourse. The key element is that students are listening to each other. Not too long ago, about 6 months ago, I observed a class, and the teacher said, I'm going to have the students engage in discourse on a certain topic. Well, they were not engaging in discourse. They were simply answering the teacher's questions. They were not speaking to each other. They were not listening to each other. They were not taking notes from each other. Learning does not only take place from what comes forth from the teachers. You probably were introduced to constructivism, where learning takes place as a result of the individual student constructing the learning at that particular period of time. I hope I'm not overburdening you with all this, but I'm trying to give you examples. And the reason for this, your anxiety, if you have an anxiety, I have the anxiety for you. I want you to go into this whole process and really, to use a street term, knock it dead, that you have no concerns about doing this, that you are very comfortable in doing this, and that you're going to do this to the best of your ability. Please make sure your writing is clear. You have reread your writing. You've made corrections to your writing when you are handling this material in. C, explain how your plans build on each other to help students make connections between skills and the essential strategy to comprehend or compose text in meaningful context. That's extremely important. You have to decide how you're going to do this. The second thing is knowledge of students to inform teaching. For each of the prompts below, describe what you know about your students with respect to the central focus of the learning segment. Not only what you know about your students in regards to what they had as the content in the past, that's very, very important, but where they are in literacy skills. That's the reason why data-driven instruction becomes very, very important. You generate data. As I mentioned when I said that I went around the room and 80% of the students could not translate this particular paragraph, that's data I have. That has to drive my instruction. But also, their prior academic learning and their requisite skills. Also, and this is underlined, their personal, cultural, and community assets. Extremely, extremely important. What do you know about your students' everyday experiences? Their cultural backgrounds, their practice and their interest. We cannot accept the students solely as another class coming in for another school year. We have to know their backgrounds, their personal background, and sometimes you don't learn that till you have the student in class for a period of time. Their cultural background. We know many things about learning. We know many things about the importance of pre-K instruction. We know that we may have students who are not literate. We may have students who never read a book completely unless it was assigned to them. So I'm speaking to you, high school teachers. Don't assume that the students have read books. This is extremely important. One of the things I used to do in regards to personal, once I got to know a student in only a few days, and I saw that student walk into my room, and I used to greet each student every day to do this, and I saw that student, it was exhibiting a different demeanor, I would speak to that student after class to try to determine what difficulties that student may be having, preface it by saying, look, it may be none of my business, but I just noticed that today you're a little bit different. It appears that you have something on your mind. It's amazing sometimes what you hear. Amazing sometimes. It's true. We have students who will come into your class on Monday morning who may not have eaten on Saturday and Sunday, and that morning did not have breakfast. That's a reality. We as educators can't solve all these problems, but we as educators must raise these issues to society and make society conscious of these particular issues. Go down to 3. You see I highlighted, I darkly underlined this. Using principles. Well, let me read the whole sentence. As needed, refer to the instructional materials and lesson plans you have included to support your explanations. Use principles, this is important, use principles from research and/or theory to support your explanations where appropriate. Very, very important. So as you're writing this out, you must use evidence from research or theories. Now, I know you've taken courses on theory. And you should go back to that as you're writing your lesson plans, as you're writing your lesson plans, and as you're writing the response to this prompt, you must include the researcher or the theory that you are making reference to. Again, in the second segment, I'm going to show you examples of that done by a teacher. Now, I know you've been introduced to many theories in education. Some of them, if not many of them, you may have to review in order to prepare these prompts. That's the reason why we started early in giving 4 classes, 4 workshops, I should say, okay? My plans are to give 4 more classes or workshops in the early spring. But I want to emphasize myself, Professor Burke and Professor Bedota, as well as your professors that you have in your courses, are always here to be of help. Go down to B, 3B. Describe and justify. This is what you have to answer. Why your instructional strategies and plan supports are appropriate for the whole class and students with similar or specific learning needs. For the whole class and students with specific or similar learning needs. That has to be described. That's part of this prompt. You have to answer that. Now, I wished that I was finished with the planning commentary, but I'm not. I did page 3, I did page 1. I'm going to give you a second or two to write down questions, and at a later time, email them to me, and I promise you, you'll get a response to the email. I'm also going to see if technology will allow me to take the question, respond to the question, and to send it out to everybody who has signed up for this online course. Page 2. And we're finished for today. I want to focus on 2 areas on page 2. The first area there is number 4, supporting literacy development through language. If you come down to vocabulary, it's basically the same as a glossary. So there should be a glossary of terms. In Common Core, when I taught teachers how to integrate Common Core, high school teachers and graduate student teachers into, say, American history, that's my field. Okay? There's a glossary of terms that the students must become familiar with. Because if they're not familiar with that, they will not, for example, the term manumission has to be understood in regards to the issue of slavery. Okay? That implies literacy. Many of my students especially on high school level, when first introduced to that term, at the 11th grade level, said, and this is probably not true, they never heard of that term. But that is extremely important. Plus at least one of the following. Syntax, so you better go back and look at syntax and what that means, and discourse. And go back and look at discourse and what that means and review that type of thing. And if you need clarification, again, you have people to reach out to. And the last thing, at the very bottom, is consider all of the students, including students with IEPs, English language learners, struggling readers, underperforming students, those with gaps in academic knowledge, and you may have students in your class who are extremely gifted students. You say, wow, but that's what you have in the class. You'll have all these students. The country is going through a major demographic shift. And you'll have these type of students in your class, whether you are in a suburban area, which may be homogeneous in regards to race and social status, you will still have students in your class. I have worked in suburban areas that are very, very wealthy areas. I have worked in the inner city areas, okay, and you will still see that that diversity in the class. Unfortunately, or fortunately, in many of the wealthy areas, parents have the money to provide individual tutors. In most of the areas, that is not the case. We have to assume that tutoring is not being paid for and provided by the parents. That we as a classroom teacher have to work with all of these students in our classes. Is that difficult? No question about it. That's why not everybody was meant to be a teacher. You are very special for going into this very fine profession. And again, I'm here to help you. I wish I could call on you to raise your hand and answer questions now, but I can't. But again, Napoli, N-A-P-O-L-I-A at stjohns.edu. Burke, B-U-R-K-E-L-1 at stjohns.edu. Pedota, P-E-D-O-T-A-P at stjohns.edu. Look forward to seeing you in December. Thank you very, very much.